Baruch Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Menachos daf Chavav, Menachos 26. And we're going to start at the Mishnah on the top of Chavav Amud Aleph. So, says the Mishnah, Nitmu Shireha, let's say a portion of the Shirayim became Tameh, or Nizrafu Shireha, or a portion of the Shirayim, let's say the Shirayim became Tameh, or the Shirayim were burnt, or Avdu Shireha, or the Shirayim were lost. Kamidis Rabbi Eliezer Kshera. If you follow the position of Rabbi Eliezer, Rashi says, who says in Parak Ketzat and Psachim that you can sprinkle the blood even though there's no meat, so too you could eat, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's kshera because you could eat the shirayim, you could pour the komets even though there's no shirayim. So Rabbi Eliezer would say it's kshera. Kumidas Rabbi Yeshua psula, but Rabbi Yeshua says if there's no imain basar ein dam, if there's no meat, you can't sprinkle the blood. So too here you wouldn't be able to do the komet. So Amarav, this idea of Rabbi Yeshua that it's disqualified if there's no shirayim, there's no komets. Who shenitmu kol shira? That's only where the entire shirayim became tamei. Of a mikta shira, but if just a portion of it became tamei, well, then Rabbi Yeshua would not say it's disqualified. So Kasal Kadaitach, Gemara says our assumption is that when Rab qualifies Rabbi Yeshua, that was nitma in avad v'sar flow, that he was saying this idea that if only a portion remained by a case of tumah, but not where a case where a portion of it was lost, a portion of it was burned, then he would say Rabbi Yeshua would say it's disqualified. Gemara says, no, that doesn't make sense. We can't have that assumption. Why? My kasavar, what would Rabbi Yeshua be holding? He kasavar shiura milsei, if he holds that shiura, that if something's left, it's significant, then it should apply not only by tumah, but I feel of nami, that even by lost or burnt. And he kasavar shiura av milsei, and if he says shiura is not significant, then v'nitma, my time. And what's the reason if it became tamei that we're going to say that under those circumstances, if it became tamei, if there's a portion of it still there, Rabbi Yeshua says it's kosher. Demirat tzitz, because the tzitz covers for it. Well, then even if the entire shirayim became tamei, Rabbi Yeshua should say that tzitz covers for it. So the Gemara says, "Om kasavar shira milsahi." That no, Rav is saying this din about shirayim not only by tumah, that if a portion of it is there, Rabbi Yeshua said it's share, but even by avad v'sarf, even by lost and burnt. And the reason why he said it's din specifically about nitma is because reishayu nakat is because that was the first one mentioned in the Mishnah, so that's the first one he mentions now. So then the Gemara says, Tanya, Rabbi Yeshua Omer Koaz Vacham Shebetorah, and Rabbi Yeshua says all the carbon goes in the Torah. And the Shtarman Kazayas Basar or Kazayas Chaylev, if there's an outsized amount of meat or Chaylev that's left, Zorek Esadam, you can still sprinkle upon. There needs to be a Kazayas. But if it's Kachatzi Zayas Basar or Kachatzi Zayas Chaylev, just half an olive size of meat and half of Chaylev, Zorek Esadam, then you could sprinkle. Then we're going to say, then you don't sprinkle the blood. But if it will be an oa, since none of it is eaten, then even if it's a half an ounce size of each, you can sprinkle the blood. Because by the oa, everything is burnt. And by mincha, even if the entire mincha is there, you cannot sprinkle. So the Gemara says, mincha, what sprinkling is there by a mincha? There's no blood by a mincha. So I'm Rav Papa, minchas nesachem. No, we're talking about where the mincha that's left is the nesachem mincha, that the flour that accompanies the an animal offering. That's so you might have thought, since this nesachem is coming accompanying the animal, you might have thought it's like the animal is still existence, and so therefore you could sprinkle the blood as long as the nesachem is there. Kamashma, we don't say that. What's the source of this idea that as long as there's a chazayis of chaylev, you can sprinkle the blood? So I'm Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Matu Ba Mishum Rabbi Yeshua Ben Chananya and Bakrat based on the pasuk. V'tir chaylev l'reach nichol Hashem. That means to say chaylev, as long as there's the fat, I feel pishem basar, even though there's no meat. V'ashkan chaylev. Okay, so we know as long as there's the chaylev, you can sprinkle the blood. Yoseres is shtei koyos. How do I know if there's the yoseres is part of the liver, shtei koyos is part of the kidneys? How do we know? The katani will be mincha afilu. The katani How do I know? It says because it says in the price that by a mincha, even if it's all there, you can't sprinkle it. Mincha will do yizrok. If it's the mincha, you cannot sprinkle it. Hayoseres ushtei koyos, but if it's your seres and shtei koyos, you should sprinkle it. And so, so the Gemara says hayoseres ushtei mincha fil koyitemas. The mincha will do yizrok. Hayoseres ushtei koyos yizrok. So if the yoseres and the shtei koyos, you could you could. So the Gemara says, Uminoan, and how do we know this? Rabbi Yochanan today Amar, whatever you bring up as reach nichoch, you're allowed to sprinkle the blood. The itzrach of michtav chalav, the itzrach of michtav reach nichoch. It needs to say both words, chalav and reach nichoch. Because of chalav, because if it just said chalav, havamina chalav, then you search shtei koyos. I would have said that the chalav you could sprinkle, but not the search shtei koyos. So because of Rahman reach nichoch, because of Rahman reach nichoch, if it just said reach nichoch, havamina afigu mincha. I would have said even the mincha nisachim is there. You could sprinkle because of Rahman chalav. So it's only by the chalav. So now we learn in the next Mishnah, Shalo b'kli sheretz, that if you try to bring up the komets, you didn't first put it into a kli sheretz, that after you took the flour, you scooped it up, you did a kmitza, you didn't put it in a kli sheretz. So the Tanakama says possible, it's disqualified. Rabbi Shimon machshir, Rabbi Shimon says it's kosher. Hiktir kumtza pamayim, but let you offer the komets twice. We'll see what that means. He really split it up. Ksher, it's kosher. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Breder Ochia, my time with Rabbi Shimon. What's the reason for Rabbi Shimon who says it's kosher, even though you didn't put it in a kli sheretz? So we are going to see three positions for this. The first is Rabbi Yehuda, Breder Rabbi Achia, then Rabbi Yanai, and then Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak. So he says, what's the reason why Rabbi Shimon says it's kosher, even though you don't put the komets into a kli sheretz? Amar Kodesh Kadashem Hi Kachatas Kasham. So that's the pasuk. That the mincha, that the komets is Kodesh Kadashim like Chatas Hasham. Boa Ovda Biyad. If you're coming to do it with your hand, Ovda Biyamin Kechatas. You could do it with your right hand like a Chatas. But if you're coming to do it with your left hand, Ovda Bismol Kasham. Then you do it with a utensil, but you could do it even in your left hand, but with a utensil like the Asham. That's what Rabbi Yehuda Breder Achia says. Rabbi Shimon is really saying that it's kosher only in your right hand. Rabbi Yanai Amar Kiman Shekamtzu Mikli Sharais. Since you took it from a Kiman Shekamtzu Mikli Sharais, Rabbi Yanai says, since you took it from the middle of a kli sharetz, then ma'el matira afilu b'emnayo v'afilu b'mekeda shel cheres. You can put it up there even in your belt or any utensil. Meaning to say, he doesn't need the hand at all. He could just do it in anything, not even a kli sharetz, and he put it up on the altar. Whereas Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak says, "Akomodim bekomet sheton kiddush." He says, "No, everybody says you first need to put it in a kli sharetz, and then after you put it in the kli sharetz, then you could take it out." V'chi machshir Rabbi Shimon Rashi says, "Behekter shem nagel mitol kli sharetz la'achar shenishkar shebavav b'yad v'tiro kasher." So according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Rabbi Shimon allows you to take it from the kli sharetz with your hand and then offer it. So the Gemara first is going to challenge these positions and going to see if all three of them really withstand the test. And the Meisvei, the Bright says, Hector chalam la'avarim be'itzim she'elam bein b'yad bein b'kli bein b'yamin bein b'smol ksherin. So the offering of the fats you could do with your hand, with your right hand or your left hand. HaKometz v'aktores, the komets, so this is the relevant part, and the ktores v'alavona she'elam bein b'yad bein b'kli bein b'yamin bein b'smol ksherin. So that the komets you could do even in your left hand. So it's obviously the position of Rabbi Shimon. It says even in your left hand. You have to do Rabbi Yehuda Berei, the Rabbi Chia. Isn't this a refutation of Rabbi Yehuda Berei Rabbi Chia? So no, because he says only the right answer. I'm Rabbi Yehuda Berei Rabbi Chia. It's starting Katani. No, you have to read this Mishnah, this price both ways. That if you're going to do it with your hand, be a min. But if you're going to do it with your kli, with your vessel, be a min, either with the right hand or the left hand. Another attempt to prove. Tashma come to shalomi klisharis v'kitcha shalomi klisharis. Let's say you took it not from a klisharis and you sanctified it not in a klisharis. V'helo v'ktira shalomi klisharis pasul. Or if you brought it up not in a klisharis, it's disqualified. Whereas Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Shimon machshirin b'matan klis. Whereas Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Shimon they're going to allow it b'matan kli, that if you put it into a utensil, and even if it's not a kli sharis. So we see from here, and this is a question on Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak, because he says you need to put it in a kli sharis. So he says, no, mimatan kli ve'elach, that from the time you put it in the utensil, at that point on, Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak says you don't need a kli sharis anymore. Tashma, another attempt on to challenge Rav Nachman. The Chachamim omrim kometz taron kli sharis. The Chachamim say that the kamitza requires a kli sharis. Ketzad kom tzom kli sharis and mikacha b'kli sharis, that you take it from a klisharis and you do the kamitza from a klisharis, and mekacha b'klisharis, and malam aktir b'klisharis. So all of this is the Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon says, "Kivan shekamsam the klisharis, malam aktir shelo b'klisharis." You don't need to put it in the klisharis. V'dayo. So isn't this a big refutation of Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak? So Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak would have to amend this price. Kivan shekamsam the karcha b'klisharis. Since you did the kamitza and you sanctified it in a klisharis, then malam aktir over dayo. Then you could bring it up with your hand. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak has to amend that price. Tashma, another attempt to challenge Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Come out to be amino, but not the mismo. Let's say you did the kamitza in your right hand and you put it into your left hand. Well, then yachzer amino, have to put it back in your right hand to do it again. Bismolo, but let's say you did it with your left hand and we're on top of Chavavam Abayz, and you had a pickle thought or improper thought, or apostle being mokaris. Then it's disqualified, no karis. Apostle being mokaris. What's not a big of chayav left karis. That's the position of Rabbi Eliezer, because the left hand is, if the left hand doesn't count, but if you do it in the right hand, then it's big and you're liable for karis. So we see from here. So in this circumstance, since his left hand, it's possible, but there's no kares. But that's the position of Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Shimon, the Chachamim, different Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shimon. Chachamim Mamrim Kivin Shenasnu, the small, once you put in your left hand, pasalto, matanaso. The Chachamim say that once you put it in your left hand, wait, did I skip one? I don't know. Which alternative languages? There's a Lishnach Harina. Chishav chutzlim kol apostle ve'emo kares. But it's not a big old b'chayav no kares. Different Rebbe Lezer, Rebbe Shimon. Come on, Kivin shenasnu is small. Once you put the komets in your left hand, pesatalto, pesalaso, matanto, that you've disqualified it. You cannot fix it. My time. And what's the reason? What's the reason of the Chacham who say that after you put it in your left hand, you're no longer able to bring it back to your right hand? Mishum debai kedusha bekli, because you're required to sanctify it in a utensil. But given shenas small, once you put in your left hand, then nasa kedam shenishpach mitzavar behema. It's like it fell on the floor, but also what you gathered up shapasul. But anyway, we see from here that that's a Chachamim's position, and called the Rebbe Lezer Shimon. They don't say that you need to put it in a utensil right after you did the kamitza. And this is a tiyufta to Rav Nachman. Tiyufta, this is indeed a refutation of Rav Nachman. So Gemara says, well, maybe Rabbi Yehuda braid Rabbi Chia Messiah. So maybe this is a proof for Rabbi Yehuda braid Rabbi Chanina, because he says you don't need the utensil; you could just put it back in your right hand. Because he says that you could do it in your right hand, and so therefore that says according to Rabbi Shimon, it doesn't disqualify. Messiah doesn't disprove that if you come to do it in your right hand, it's okay. So you just put it from your left hand back in your right hand. But Rabbi Yanai lema tiyufta. But according to Rabbi Yanai, who says you could do it whichever hand you want, this is also a refutation, because here we say that if you did in your left hand, it doesn't make kares, and you wouldn't have to put it back in your right hand. Rabbi Yanai, no, Ana de Amre. Rabbi Yanai said, I would say Ketanam de Hector. I would say that I would say like the earlier Brisa, who said that you could do it with your right hand or your left hand, and so therefore it's not disqualified. The law would start them Ketani, and I don't read the Brisa like Rabbi Yehuda read it, that it was read with student in each direction. Okay, now we're up to the next piece in the mission. It says Rabbi Shulman Levi. So our mission said, according to the Rabbanon, that if you did the kamitza twice, meaning you split in half, it's kosher. But Rabbi Shimon Levi says, Says about those Rabbanon, that means twice, but not 3 or 4 times. And Yochanan Amar Pamayim Vafilu Pamei Pamayim. Even 3 or 4 times. My benaya. What's the distinction between Rabbi Shimon Levi and Rabbi Yochanan? Amar Bezira Yesh Kometz Pachos Mishnei Zeisim. It's a double dispute. First of all, can the kometz be less than 2 olives? V'yesh aktara pachos mikazayis. And can you do the aktara if it's less than a kazayis? Rabbi Shimon Levi says, "Ein kometz pachos mishnei zeisim." You can't divide up the komitza less than 2 olives. So therefore, twice is okay, but more than that, it's not going to be okay. And also you can't have a aktara less than a kazayis. So Rabbi Yochanan Tzavar, yesh kometz pachos mishnei zeisim. You can have a kometz less than 2 olives. V'yesh aktara chusa mikazayis. You can have an aktara less than a kazayis. In mar kometz meimatay matir shirayim b'achila. So says ask the Gemara, at what point when the komitza there has to be aktara, how much of it has to be burnt in order to allow the shirayim to be in? Rabbi Chanina Omer Misha Mashal Boasar. He says from the moment the fire takes a hold of it. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Misha Tatsu says or Barubo. No, when the fire is over the majority of it. Amrle Rabbi Udo Rabbi Bar Rav Yitzchak. So Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Rav Yitzchak, "Az bracha taimed Rabbi Yochanan." I'll explain to you the reasoning of Rabbi Yochanan. Based upon the pasuk, "V'hinei Allah kitor aretz ki kitor kivshan." From stone, it says that there was the smoke went up on the earth like the smoke of a furnace. Ein kivshan malak kitor, and agitatati to or beruba, and the furnace doesn't send the smoke until it's in the majority. That's the idea that it has to be over the majority. Amrei Ravim Baravado Rava Amri Talmidach. Your students say Amar Avam Ram Tanya Eli Al Advarim Shadar Kolikar V'Laila. He says there's a brisa that says I only know. The brisa says I only know. So the brisa says those Torah it's based on the pasuk. This I only know that those things that are supposed to go on the altar, those things that are supposed to be done all night, could go in a varmu like the limbs and the fat, that you can bring them up even after nightfall, and then they burn the entire night. Dvarim shadarkan. What about those things that are supposed to be brought today? Could go during the day. Could go on kometz v'albona v'aktoretz v'mincha u'minchas kohan u'minchas kol mashiach u'minchas tzachim shemal mater meboat shemesh. How do I know you could bring them up also? And Gemara says, 1 second. We just said you can't. Hamaras darkon kar v'yom. Don't we say you have to bring the day? Ela im ba shemesh. How do I know that you could bring him just before the nightfall with the setting of the sun? Shemesachim v'holchin kol. How do we know you could do that? I mean, I'm Tam Omer zos Torah sa'oah. Says this is the law of the Ola Riba. So that's the pasuk. It's included from Zos Torah Ola. But Vaha im Ba Shemesh, well Mishkacha Shlosh Baru. So you're allowed to bring up the Mincha, the Torah, right as the sun's setting. But at that moment, it has not gone over the majority. So how is it allowed? So isn't this a question on the one that says you required over the majority? And where it says Lo Kasha, Kan La Klo, Kan La Hatir. No, it's not a problem. The brisa that says that Ba Shemesh, that's just saying for it to be allowed to go remain on the altar. But the other brisa that talks about that, the other one is talking about when the shirayim become permitted, and that's when it goes over the majority. He says no, it's not in ba shemesh, it's mibo shemesh after nightfall. He doesn't change the text. Umukim wabapokin. He says it's referring to a specific case where something fell off the altar that you could put it back. We're talking about pokin. Does Rabbi Yana really say this? Then Rabbi Yana say, if there is a Keturah that jumped off the altar, a few kartin sheba, a machzirno, that what fell off the altar, even the keratin of it, even the full pieces, even the full pieces of it. Even the full pieces, a machzirno. So meaning to say, even the fullest pieces that you think you'd have to bring back, you don't put those back. The burnt parts of the oil you put back, but you don't put back the Ketores. So the Gemara says, okay, yeah, take out Ketores, some Ketores. Okay, it's not talking about the Ketores, but other than that, the price is supported. Amar Vasi, Kipasha Rebbe Lazar b'Menachos. He says when Rebbe Lazar was learning Mestachas Menachos by Yachi, he asked the following question: Komet shesidru v'sider lavas amaracha. Komets that you arrange. And so Chazon Ish says that this question is that not that you put the komets on the altar and then to put the fire, but somehow you put the kamitza underneath the wood. Somehow it got underneath the wood on the fire. Mao derech haktar b'kach or ein derech haktar b'kach. Is that the way you typically offer something or not? So the Gemara says, take a little discussion on resolve. But Chizkiah also has the question. The limbs that you arrange and you put the fire pot on it. Here too, it's the same idea that you put the limbs under the wood somehow. Does it need to be specifically on the wood? So since there's another pasuk that means al mizbeach and not on the eitzim, that you can do it either way. Gemara says take. We'll leave the question unresolved. Now the by Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, let's say the limbs that you put next to the fire. What will be the law there? Is that considered like you burnt it properly or not? According to one who says when it says al in the Torah means on lo tibayalach, then it's not going to be a question. The it's only a question. Only according to one who says al is next to. That where does it say al is next to? According to one who says al is samach, then al can also be next to. My hachinami al b'samach udama al eitzim. Or maybe it means on the wood. Dumya al mizbech ma'asam al mamish hachinami al mamish. So the Gemara leaves this question unresolved. Teku. Okay, so now we can do the next Mishnah. Akometz miut ma'akev es rubo. So let's say you did just a kamitza, but you didn't do enough. You didn't do 2 olive size. So that's going to be disqualified. It requires it. Isara miuto. Let's say you don't have a full amount of flour. Ma'akev es rubo. Then it's not good. Hayayin. Let's say you don't have the quarter lug of wine for the sheep, mute ma'akev es rubo, and so therefore the nesachim is disqualified. Hashem, and if you don't have enough oil in the nesachim, mute ma'akev es rubo, it's disqualified. So it's vashemen ma'akvin. Let's say you don't have enough flour. You either don't have flour or oil. If you're missing one of them, like you didn't bring it at all. Also, if you don't have the kamitza and the lavona, if you didn't bring one of them, it's like you didn't do a kamitza at all. My time, what's the reason that all these things are ma'akvin each other? It says one time by Menachos and Dava kamatz misham malo kumso, and also says the second time by Menachos hadachote kamatz kom mimena malo kumso. So it's to teach us la'akev. Isaron miu ma'akev esrubo. My time, and what's the reasoning? Amarkra misalta shem chasra kolshu psula. That if it's missing a little bit of it, it's disqualified. Hayayin. How do we know by why miu ma'akev esrubo? Because it says kacha yeyasel ashor echad. The word kacha implies it's needed. Hashem miu ma'akev esrubo. How do you know this? The minchas nesachim kacha, but minchas davar markra mishamna shem chiser kolshu psula. If it's missing any man, it's disqualified. Hashem and masoas ma'achim. How do you know flour and oil are both necessary? Misalta mishamna, migirso mishamna. So it teaches us that those are telling us that the solas and the shaman required. Because it says al kol avona sav kol avona asher al mincha. So that teaches us that they're all essential. All right, we'll stop here. Baruch Hashem, and we'll do the daf again today at noon. Baruch Hashem. This is today's daf.